Who was the biggest mass murderer in the history of the world? Most people probably assume that the answer is Adolf Hitler, architect of the Holocaust. Others might guess Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, who may indeed have managed to kill even more innocent people than Hitler did. In today's video, I will tell you about the mass killing spree taken out by the Chinese dictator Mao. Both Hitler and Stalin were outdone by Mao Zedong. From 1958 to 1962, his Great Leap Forward policy led to the deaths of up to 45 million people, easily making it the biggest episode of mass murder ever recorded. Mao Zedong killed far more people than Hitler. Mao's Great Leap Forward killed 45 million in 4 years. Mao Zedong, founder of the People's Republic of China, qualifies as the greatest mass murderer in world history. Some estimates go as high as 78 million people. The latter number includes people who staved to death due to the mismanagement of the communists. Stalin comes in at a distant second at only 20 million, according to some experts. That number includes the deliberate murder of 5.4 million Jews. The number of deaths attributed to Stalin reaches up to 60 million, depending on which writer you believe. The vast, cruel, deliberate extinction of millions. The basic facts of the Great Leap Forward have long been known to scholars. DICTATORS' work is noteworthy for demonstrating that the number of victims may have been even greater than previously thought, and that the mass murder was more clearly intentional on Mao's part, and included large numbers of victims who were executed or tortured, as opposed to merely starved to death. Even the previously standard estimates of 30 million or more would still make this the greatest mass murder in history. While the horrors of the Great Leap Forward are well known to experts on communism and Chinese history, they are rarely remembered by ordinary people outside China, and have had only a modest cultural impact. When Westerners think of the great evils of world history, they rarely think of this one. The fact that Mao's atrocities resulted in many more deaths than those of Hitler does not necessarily mean he was the more evil of the two. The greater death toll is partly the result of the fact that Mao ruled over a much larger population for a much longer time. The vast scale of Chinese communist atrocities puts them in the same general ballpark. At the very least, they deserve far more recognition than they currently receive. In China, the regime has in recent years admitted that Mao made mistakes and allowed some degree of open discussion about this history. But the government is unwilling to admit that the mass murder was intentional, and continues to occasionally suppress and persecute dissidents who point out the truth. This reluctance is an obvious result of the fact that the Communist Party still rules China. Although they have repudiated many of Mao's specific policies, the regime still derives much of its legitimacy from his legacy. Why it matters. For both Chinese and Westerners, failure to acknowledge the true nature of the Great Leap Forward carries serious costs. Some survivors of the Great Leap Forward are still alive today. They deserve far greater recognition of the horrible injustice they suffered. They also deserve compensation for their losses and the infliction of appropriate punishment on the remaining perpetrators. Some victims and perpetrators of the Great Leap Forward are still alive. In addition, our continuing historical blind spot about the crimes of Mao and other communist rulers leads us to underestimate the horrors of such policies and makes it more likely that they might be revived in the future. The horrendous history of China and their imitators should have permanently discredited socialism as completely as fascism was discredited by the Nazis, but it has not, so far, fully done so. The Great Leap Forward of Mao. The Great Leap Forward was an attempt by China, under the direction of its leader, Mao Zedong, to make China into a modern industrial power. China had become a communist nation in the fall of 1949, after a long civil war with the nationalists. Mao believed that if China increased its industrial base, they would be taken more seriously in international relations. Mao also believed that industrialization would make China the dominant communist government of the world instead of the Soviet Union. The Great Leap Forward moved millions of people from the countryside into urban areas. According to the authoritative Black Book of Communism, an estimated 65 million Chinese died as a result of Mao's repeated, merciless attempts to create a new socialist China. Anyone who got in his way was done away with by execution, imprisonment, or forced famine. For Mao, the #1 enemy was the intellectual. The so-called Great Helmsman reveled in his bloodletting, boasting. What's so unusual about Emperor Shi Huang of the China dynasty? He had buried alive 460 scholars only, but we have buried alive 46,000 scholars. Mao was referring to a major accomplishment of the Great Cultural Revolution, which from 1966 to 1976 transformed China into a great house of fear. The most inhumane example of Mao's contempt for human life came when he ordered the collectivization of China's agriculture under the ironic slogan, "The Great Leap Forward." A deadly combination of lies about grain production, disastrous farming methods, profitable tea plantations, for example, were turned into rice fields, and misdistribution of food produced the worst famine in human history. Deaths from hunger reached more than 50% in some Chinese villages. The total number of dead from 1959 to 1961 was between 30 million and 40 million.